Welcome to the world tonight. There have been many media portrayals, political fights, and discussions over the years about our topic tonight, mental illness.
Mental illness is a topic that's messy and tangled, but one that needs to be talked about. But before we get into it, let's discuss what's happening in the world. President-elect Donald Trump has been having some issues with creating his transition team. Many have opposed his choices for his staff. I don't really get why people are so upset. With the Sith Lord as Trump's head advisor and Newt Gingrich trying to get us to settle on the moon, Star Wars is going to be a reality. Bernie can be Obi-Wan and Hillary will be Leia. Obama is already cool enough to be Han Solo. It's a win-win situation.
Trump has also begun to backtrack on a lot of things he strongly advocated for during his campaign. One of them is that he's no longer going to conduct further investigation into Hillary Clinton's email scandal. He says he doesn't want to hurt the Clintons after such a vicious campaign. The official transition from campaign candidate to president has begun. It happens to everyone. Bill Clinton had to retire his saxophone and smooth talking. Bush forgot how to properly use the English language. And Obama lost his boyish hope for the world. Now Trump is making his transition like that racist uncle who gets told off by your grandma to make peace just because it's the holidays. He's there in the corner grumbling about immigrants while he passes you the pumpkin pie. Cinnamon and deportation.
The Pope recently announced that he is extending priest's ability to forgive the great sin of abortion. He instated this to have a more welcoming and merciful church. America, on the other hand, might see Roe v. Wade repealed under Trump. You know you're not doing well when the Catholic Church is more progressive than you.
The Turkish Prime Minister has withdrawn a bill that pardons men convicted of sex with underage girls if they've married them. Yeah, you heard me right. If a pedophile married the girl he raped, then he would get off scot-free. The fact that this bill even got close to Parliament is insane. What's next? They pass a law that makes murder legal? Why don't we allow bestiality while we're at it? Turkey, get it together. Thanksgiving is over. You're not special anymore.
Now let's get into our main theme tonight, mental illness. We are joined by our national correspondents, Majestic Storm and Afiq Hisham, to talk about some of the many issues in today's society.
Mental illness can be hard for a lot of people to relate to. If you've never experienced mental illness, you might not know how many people it affects. If you have experienced mental illness, you might not realize how incredibly common it is.
According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, roughly 44 million people in the US experience mental illness every year. 44 million people. That's as many people as the combined population of Canada and Switzerland. Now, of those 44 million, roughly 10 million experiences serious mental illness, substantially interfering with or limiting one or more major life activities. 10 million. That's still more than the entire population of Switzerland. What I'm really trying to say here is, Switzerland, you're a tiny little country. Clearly, you're just overcompensating with your giant mountains and fashionable lederhosen.
But looking at where America ranks, things are a bit concerning. The US leads the globe in incidence of mental health disorders. Following the US is Ukraine, Colombia, New Zealand, Lebanon, and France, which all have rates of mental disorders around 20%.
While it's hard to trace patterns of mental health disorders, one factor does seem prevalent: a country's wealth. Ron Kessler, World Health Organization mental health researcher, says by and large people in less developed countries are less depressed. He says since they're just trying to survive, they don't have time for depression. Which means if Donald Trump is as rich as he claims to be, he's probably more depressed than everyone who watched him win the election.
Now, in many parts of the world, treatment correlates with the country's level of development in healthcare expenditures. Kessler says countries with universal health care see higher treatment rates. Meanwhile, in the US, only 41.1% of people with mental health disorders receive treatment. And while people in the lowest socioeconomic group can access treatment through Medicaid, the second lowest group often cannot afford care.
To summarize what Kessler is saying, a lot of Americans are well off enough to address their mental health issues, but aren't well off enough to afford treatment. And if you can't relate to that, just think of this. Imagine being rich enough to be able to buy a tiger, but not rich enough to buy any food for it, and it just ends up gnawing off your leg. Back to you at the desk.
Thanks, Afiq. As we are only a few weeks past the election now, there has been speculation on how the Trump campaign is going to handle the wide variety of issues facing the people of this country. Our political correspondent, Shannon Hecht, has more on what the mental health coverage will look like during this Trump administration.
Healthcare is an extremely important subject, especially when it relates to mental health. As we stated before in the show, a lot of middle-class Americans can't afford healthcare at the current rates. Many Republicans blame the Affordable Care Act for the rise in insurance costs and say that by repealing it, costs will go back down. But it's important to remember that the problems with the U.S. healthcare system did not begin with and will not end with the repeal of Obamacare. Oh, and surprise, I just quoted Donald Trump's website and you didn't even know it. Greatagain.gov, baby.
Wait, are you saying after all his speeches about repealing Obamacare, he's taking it back?
Right. President-elect Trump has already taken back some promises he made on the campaign trail in regards to the ACA. Trump has said he may preserve the law's prohibition on insurance companies denying coverage based on pre-existing conditions. He said he would also consider keeping the provision to allow parents to cover children until they're 26.
Aw, nice! I can freeload off my parents even longer.
In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, when talking about those specific provisions, he said, quote, "I like those very much," which is what he also says about the Statue of Liberty's breasts every time he sees them from a plane. He doesn't say ta-ta when he leaves New York. He says tatas.
Shannon, please stay on topic.
Ah, yes, right. Now, even though Trump is looking at reshaping Obamacare, he still hasn't addressed mental health care to a very large extent. However, he has addressed it in regards to veterans and PTSD. Trump has called for robust health care for those returning home from war, which is objectively a fantastic thing, but he hasn't yet to address this issue on a much broader scale. For instance, if you try to Google his plans for mental health, you come up with slightly different results. If you Google Trump mental health, the first page of results are all articles examining whether Donald Trump is mentally stable or not. One of which is actually a petition to change.org to diagnose Trump with narcissistic personality disorder.
People petition anything on change.org. I swear I got an email just the other day to sign a petition to outlaw the word daddy from any conversation. I did not sign because Mama did not raise no king shamer.
What is the deal with people getting off topic today? Moving on. Eli Clayton is here to tell us about the mental health of today's youth. Eli, over to you.
Thanks, Jacob. When it comes to physical health, young people are perceived to be the healthiest demographic, and for the most part, that's true. However, when it comes to mental health, youth are just as susceptible to mental illness as any other group of people, and possibly even more so. According to a 2010 report from youth.gov, 49.5% of adolescents in the U.S. met criteria for mental health disorders. That's almost double the likelihood for an adult. The most common disorders found in the study were anxiety, behavior, mood, and substance use disorders. 42% of those affected also met criteria for a second disorder. The same study found that even select groups within the youth demographic have increased risks for mental illness. Children from low-income households, youth involved in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, and youth of color all have higher risks for having mental illness and experience disparity in prevalence and treatment for mental health issues.
There's a common belief that people with mental illness are dangerous and more susceptible to being criminals. Eli, what do you have to say about this?
Mental illness is just that, an illness. It should be treated as such. However, that is not the way it is currently treated in the United States. Today's institutions seem to think the best way to fight mental illness is to lock up the mentally ill. According to the National Research Council, 64% of jail inmates report mental health concerns. This makes the mentally ill one of the most imprisoned groups in America. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reports that about a quarter of state prisoners with mental conditions face 3 or more prior incarcerations. 25%! Why wouldn't law enforcement try something different after arresting the same ailing person 4 times? That's like crashing your bike 4 times in a row and never deciding to wear a helmet. Also, your bike has Asperger's. Clearly, something needs to change. A common misconception is people with mental conditions go to jail because mental conditions make them more prone to crime. This is not necessarily true. In fact, the American Psychological Association reports only about 8% of crimes committed by people with serious illnesses are directly linked to symptoms of their illnesses. The mentally ill are more likely to approve of Congress than they are to commit a crime because of their illnesses. So why are the mentally ill incarcerated so much more than the mentally healthy? The answer is unclear, but it is not unreasonable to speculate discrimination.
Thanks, Eli. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an intricate mental illness. It's developed after the experience of a traumatic or extremely stressful situation. But what do people with PTSD really have to deal with when the traumatic event is over?
Well, according to the National Center for PTSD at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, PTSD symptoms may include reliving the event through flashbacks, avoiding situations that trigger memories of the event, feeling negatively about things, and being highly stressed. That's not to mention depression, loneliness, alcoholism, and other potential problems that may also arise.
Unfortunately, this is the reality for millions of U.S. veterans who've been exposed to combat. Roughly 11 to 20 out of every 100 veterans who served in Iraq or Afghanistan in particular develop PTSD within a given year. It's no wonder then that veterans who suffer from it often find it challenging to transition into civilian life upon returning home from active duty.
That's not to say that the U.S. government hasn't tried to offer help. For instance, under the Obama administration, 5 years of free health care was made eligible to veterans who have served since November 11, 1998. Still, a 2015 poll conducted by the Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation revealed that over half of all 2.6 million U.S. veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan feel that government efforts have been lacking.
However, while conventional aid hasn't been up to snuff, veterans with PTSD may find help in digitally crafted worlds of all places. Outside of pure escapism, anecdotal evidence from interviews between Complex Magazine and veterans of the Iraq War suggests that video games may help some veterans to cope by creating some sense of urgency through objective-based gameplay in a group setting.
Nonprofits such as StackedUp.org recognize this potential in video games. Founded in 2015, the nonprofit offers programs that send video game care packages to veterans regardless of locale, those that send disabled vets to gaming conventions, and those that provide volunteer opportunities for both veterans and civilians alike. It's certainly a far cry from the stereotypical stay-at-home video game playing basement dweller who smells like Axe body spray and week-old Mountain Dew.
Speaking of virtual experiences, those with PTSD can also seek help through Dr. Albert Skip Rizzo's Virtual Iraq-Afghanistan simulation program. Utilizing virtual reality exposure therapy, or VRET, patients work with therapists to virtually reenact a traumatic memory multiple times through computer graphics to lessen their intensity. It's kind of like a video game boss battle in a way. The more you try to fight the boss, the more you learn how to beat it until you eventually do, even if it does take a gazillion tries.
There's a saying that acknowledging a problem is the first step in solving it, and this definitely applies to PTSD and mental illness in general. But suffering veterans tend to find it difficult when admitting to having PTSD is seen as a sign of weakness by so many, since soldiers are socially expected to be tough and resilient. It doesn't really help, either, when figureheads like President-elect Donald Trump make statements suggesting that those with the condition are not strong.
Next, we are tackling the problem of stigma against those who have mental illnesses. Whether you've experienced discrimination for having an illness at some point or you've said something that can be offensive to those who suffer from them, there's still much to understand on the issue. Majestic and Afik join us again to explain.
People commonly use phrases like, I'm so depressed, I need to clean this mess, I'm so OCD, and you're giving me a panic attack. Saying things like this takes away validation from people who really suffer from these illnesses. Normalizing phrases wrongly defining illnesses erases all the progress made to be more open about mental health.
90% of suicide victims have some underlying mental illness, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. This is no joke. Over 60% of adults do not receive treatment for their mental health. There is widespread stigma against being open about mental illness. If there isn't a change in America's mental health policies, people who need help will continue going untreated and even dying.
There is a difference between OCD and wanting to be organized. There is a difference between having a panic attack and being stressed. There is a difference between being depressed and just being regularly sad. Discrediting mental illness discourages people from taking it seriously.
According to the NAMI, 1 in 5 American adults suffer from a mental illness. People are making a joke of 1 in 5 of their fellow citizens. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America says the most common mental illness is some form of anxiety disorder. Anxiety is highly treatable in most cases, but only about 1/3 of those suffering receive treatment.
Media portrayal contributes to misconceptions on mental illness. Characters with depression are often portrayed as mopey and just waiting for something good to happen to lift their spirits. Everyone knows EO is the most obnoxious version of sadness around, but who can blame him? His tail isn't even attached, and that really can affect a man.
Fictional media depicts schizophrenics as a danger to themselves and violent to society. They are shunned, feared, and denied opportunities. The disorder affects one's perception of reality and often causes delusions. While it can be debilitating, it can be treatable and manageable.
Obsessive-compulsive people are written off as anal organizers. OCD is when a person has uncontrollable, reoccurring thoughts and behaviors that he or she feels the urge to repeat over and over. Stop making real disorders into your excuse to make your roommates' lives hell, because you don't want to swallow spoons in with the ladles. Why don't you go color-code your post-it notes elsewhere, Cheryl?
Now, on a serious note, if you are a student at WSU, there are many services for you to get help for a mental illness. The Counseling and Testing Services offers psychological assistance. Health and Wellness Services also offers help. And by help, they mean it can and will be fixed with some rest. There are many strategies to coping with anxiety, depression, and any of the symptoms that come with mental disorders. As easy as it is to just drink away the problem or smoke until you don't feel anything, drugs can have a negative influence on mental illnesses and even make them worse. They serve as only temporary fixes.
If you are someone who deals with mental illness, or you know someone who does, there are ways to get help. Don't be afraid to talk about it, because if we keep sweeping it under the rug, then the stigma will live on. Federally funded treatment may not look that much better under a Trump administration, but there is still hope. What you feel and experience is valid, and you don't have to hide it away anymore. Awareness is the first step to change. Acceptance and removing the hurtful language from everyday conversations can take us even closer. This is The World Tonight.